Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us live. It is September 6th, this lovely Labor Day Monday. My name is Sean Phillips. As always, I am joined with my co-host, Mr. Andy Van Beber. Our other co-host, Travis Kirkendall, could not make it out tonight. He is celebrating a very special birthday, so happy birthday to his wife, Danny. But we are joined today by a wonderful guest, Mr. Chad Perkins. Gentlemen, how are you two doing this evening?
Fantastic, brother. How are you? How was your Labor Day activities?
Labor Day itself wasn't too bad. It was pretty much a lot of lax. I spent the weekend back home in Pike County, Missouri. A good friend of mine, his father passed away suddenly last week, and so we celebrated his life, and I got to catch up with some old friends and connect with him a bit. So it was a sad weekend, but also a weekend filled with some much needed laughter and smiles and all that good stuff. So
that really, and we won't mention any names, but that really surprised me. That he was a young fellow too, so that really surprised me. So we want to welcome Chad Perkins, State Representative District 40. His representative district takes in Monroe, Pike, Lincoln, and Rawls, and we were just talking before we went on broadcast tonight about how it's going to change a little bit. Chad, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, fellas.
Yeah, and we're going to just kind of go through our normal routine tonight, and Sean, to jump in whenever. But why don't we just start out by talking about, Chad, a little bit about your background and your past service and everything?
Sure, yeah. I spent 21 years in law enforcement. Spent some time as mayor in Bowling Green, and I've worked in radio since I was 15, so 28 years now.
KJFM,
KBCR. I did a little time at some other
Oh,
places.
KPCR. I forgot when it was before KJFM was KPCR. That's way back.
Yeah. I've been around a while.
Yeah. And why did you choose, of all things, to go into state politics? What led you to do that?
Well, I think that the role of the state government is a vital one, and it actually influences your day-to-day life every bit as much as federal politics, which dominate the news a lot. But the state government actually influences so many things, from education, healthcare, a wide variety of things, very much in the same way the federal government does.
Mm-hmm. And so, obviously, with a lot of things going on, we're going to cover some of these a little bit more in depth tonight. What are some of the current challenges you face or are facing in this time? I guess you could say, with whatever. What's the biggest challenges you're facing right now?
I think right now you have a discussion that's sort of a fundamental discussion about the role of government in people's lives, and I think a lot of the COVID discussion circles around that, right? Mm-hmm. I think that everybody on both sides agree that it's a deadly disease. I lost a family member just last week to it, so it's. I think we all understand that it's a real disease. It impacts people's lives, and otherwise healthy people die from it. Mm-hmm. With that being said, I think that we also agree that personal liberties are important. Mm-hmm. And so there's a balancing act that takes place. And that's probably the number one discussion going on, at least in Jefferson City right now, probably in every state capital across the country.
So, and we'll get to that. We're going to get to COVID here in a second. And I want to, so as I was looking at some stuff today, and with the state of partisan politics, and I would say ripping our country apart, what do you see with partisan politics? I mean, what effect does it have in Jeff City? What are you seeing? I mean, is there a spirit? I mean, do you see a lot of bipartisan working together, or is it more we still are split down the aisle kind of thing? Or
I'll say this. We don't necessarily vote the same way or agree on the issues, but I think we get along fairly well, right? Now it's off the House floor, off the debate floor. The parties get along fairly well. Mm-hmm.
Well, so you mentioned about the
I think it's one thing to disagree on an issue. It's a whole other to sort of attack somebody because of that.
And that's kind of where I was going with that. Because and this has been, and Sean, jump in on, we've talked about this a lot, about the state of our politicians as far as Do you, and I mean, again, I'm asking you this from a state, I know this is a state looking at, and we're going to kind of get into the federal stuff here in a little bit, but do you think, I mean, are we going to, Joe Biden had talked about how he said he wanted to promote more bipartisan politics. Do you think federal government is too far gone in its partisan politics to get to a point where they can work back together again, or are we just too far gone on that?
Well, I think that there's an ebb and flow to that, right? I think much of it's based on personalities.
Mm-hmm.
So to say that that DC's uglier now than it ever has been, I know you're a student of history yourself. That's not exactly true, right? Politics in the 1830s were incredibly ugly, right?
Yeah.
But Andrew Jackson and
Right.
that. So I think that there are times in history when it's worse than others.
Mm-hmm.
But players come along eventually, and things settle down some. But then they'll. I mean, it's just the nature of disagreement, right?
Well, and I think it takes certain events to bring. I mean, obviously, this next weekend, and we're probably going to be talking about on next week's shows, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And my wife and I were just talking tonight about how, before 9/11, you didn't see a lot of the, people flying the American flags and just doing the. But I mean, when 9/11 occurred, it was just like one day we're one thing, the next day we're, I was in my, so that was 2001. I was in my 5th year of teaching. So that was my 5th year of teaching, and I was even asked at public school. Our principal asked me, "Hey, do you want to lead a prayer around the flagpole during lunchtime, during public school time, to pray for our country?" And how old were you, Sean, when 9/11 occurred?
I was actually just talking about this yesterday. I was 5. I was in kindergarten.
So we see, and since that time, I think that we came together for that brief period of time, and then we started, and now we're at this point where we're back to it seems like we're back to square one again, like you said, Chad, that it was, it is an ebb and flow, and I hope that things change. But I wanted to get into so we were going to talk a little bit about the pandemic a little bit first, and then so this was a quote from the governor back on August 5th. This was in the Missouri Times,
which, by the way, that's a great publication.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of those publications that, at least in Jefferson City, in my opinion, carries a lot more weight than either the Kansas City Star or the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Yeah, I had a friend of mine who we were having trouble getting the Post-Dispatch for the election coverage last year, and I was posting something on about one of my friends called it the liberal rag. So, but and the thing about the Missouri Times is that they have great relationships with people on both sides of the aisle. They're very reliable. And its publication is now sort of widely read across the state of Missouri. So if you're not familiar with the Missouri Times, go to that website, join that, and I don't know how Scott does it, the publisher, but he oftentimes knows things going on long before I ever did.
Right, and that's where we, especially at school, we get a lot of our stuff from. But this was August 5th. This is from way back, but I thought this was a very interesting post by the governor, or a quote by the governor. He said, it's disappointing because, and asking about the state of COVID and the Delta variant and everything, he said it's disappointing because it is inconsistent with the overwhelming evidence surrounding the efficacy of the vaccines and their proven results. It only serves to disrupt the increases we are seeing in vaccine uptake. This self-inflicted setback encourages skepticism and vaccine hesitancy at a time when the goal is to prevent serious illness and deaths from COVID-19 through vaccinations. He also said that it's concerning the nation because the nation's top public health agency appears to be cowering to the political pressures of those who only want to force mandates and shutdowns, which only further prolong the recovery. This decision only promotes fear and further. And so he's speaking about mandates and everything. So, how do you feel about the state's response to the pandemic thus far?
I think Missouri's response has been pretty fair, right? There are a few things I'd like to see us get done. I think that we can get them done maybe as soon as next week. We have a veto session. I'll be in Jefferson City next week for most of the week. And I think that you'll see maybe some change take place then. But, governor's an interesting job because you have to protect public health. You have to protect an economy. And by the way, these things are important too. And so I think the governor's done a pretty fair job.
So when we're looking at the numbers too, and what really, and me as a parent has really with this Delta variant. So
because I will say, because you lived in Illinois for quite a while,
yeah.
and that I think that Governor Pritzker probably is Missouri's Employee of the Month.
Yeah. Yes, he is.
No
because,
one has done more for Missouri's economy.
Yes,
than
because
Pritzker.
I did check. So the average over the last 3 years, and this is, of course, you have to take in Wisconsin, Indiana, Kentucky. You can even bring in Western Tennessee, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas. Illinois is, or not Kansas. Yeah, well, not Kansas. Iowa. I'm thinking of Missouri for a second.
Right.
But they've averaged 32,000 people for over the last 3 years. Average of 32,000 people leaving Illinois and coming to Missouri, or going to other states, and we just added that number. But the thing with this Delta variant is, children. They said, and I was looking at a stat website today. It said that among children make up 500,000 new cases with this Delta variant. So, with scientists, and you and I talked about this before, scientists are calling for mask mandates in schools. What are your thoughts on that as far as mask mandates? You and I kind of talked about it beforehand, but if you could just kind of share with our crowd.
I think that I've never have been a fan of the government protecting people from themselves, and that choice is freedom of choice is your right as it pertains to what you choose to do, right? As it affects you. So I've always kind of wondered, if you choose to get the vaccine, that's your decision. And I applaud your decision. If you would choose not to, once again, that's your decision. If the vaccine affords you a level of protection, both physically and emotionally, that's great. What does someone not getting a vaccine have to do with whether or not you get one? Or vice versa, right? So if you're protected, why do you care whether I am or not? How does, let's say that you're the person sitting beside you in a classroom chooses not to get a vaccine, and you choose to get it. If the person sitting beside you chooses not to, but you've gotten yours, how does that affect you? And so it's about liberty, right? And so absolutely, we've got an attorney general in Missouri that. And Eric Schmidt, that's just hitting home runs every day. He beat St. Louis County, he beat St. Louis City, he beat Jackson County in their mask mandates. He's taking on the Columbia School District right now regarding masks and vaccines. I think that every public school in the state is waiting to see a court decision on the state of Missouri versus Columbia Public Schools. Eric Schmidt's hit home runs every time. I expect him to win this one also. And I think that most public schools are just looking for some direction, right? I think public schools in general are led by very well-meaning people, people who want to do the right thing, people who are just as lost as you and I are, right? Because this is, we've been dealing with this for 18, 19 months, but it's kind of new. Like, I spent the first 40-some years of my life never dreaming this would be something we'd ever deal with. And so everybody's reaction to it is still a little, I don't know what to do, right? And people follow certain legal advice. Attorneys typically will be extra cautious, right? They think about liabilities and things of that nature. But I think that the public schools would be well served by a court decision that comes down one way or the other, but at least it gives them some direction. I expect the Attorney General to win. And I also think that you can see us attempt to come up with some legislation next week that will give everybody a direction to go.
Do you think, so I want to go back to something you said earlier about, so within this theory of government, and I know we have a lot of listeners. I saw my buddy Ben Creech from Montgomery County is on tonight. Ben, good to see you on. But there's this theory within government that part of the government's, when you talk about Fourth Amendment and due process rights, okay, part of that is, and there's this theory out there that says, okay, government has the power to supersede due process when it comes to what they call police powers, whether it be to protect you for public health, safety, welfare. That's why we have helmet laws, seatbelt laws, and everything. And the argument that I've read about this from both sides, and the argument that the mask mandate side people are coming from is this is a matter of, and you've heard Dr. Fauci, which I have mixed views about Dr. Fauci as well, but Dr. Fauci has said stuff like, well, this is not a political issue, this is a public health issue, and we're turning it into a constitutional law issue. We're turning it into, I mean, do you think that the federal government will try to step? I mean, there's talk about this mask mandate and overriding states altogether and saying, this isn't a states' rights issue. This is a public health issue. This is a public health crisis. How would you respond to that kind of thing?
I think if the federal government could have done it, they would have already done it.
Right.
I think there are legal opinions out there. First of all, yeah, Dr. Fauci says that one day. The next day, who knows what he says? The guy changes constantly.
Right.
So I think if the Biden administration could have enforced these mandates, they would have done them already.
Mm-hmm.
I think that even lawyers that they have on their staff say, I don't think the federal government can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, if you want to give it a shot, try.
Mm-hmm.
But the government doesn't need to be protecting people from themselves
Mm-hmm.
constantly. Mm-hmm. I remember thinking back in '08, I'm watching the presidential debates. Ron Paul was running.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking back in '08, oh, I don't know about this guy.
States' rights and everything.
I don't know about this guy. He might be
Right.
way too far out there. And then, of course, 2012 comes along, and then 2016. And as the last 13, 14, 15 years have developed, I start thinking, maybe this old man was right all along.
Mm-hmm.
I've become more and more libertarian as the government attempts to take more and more of my rights away
Right.
and your rights away. And so what I really need the government to do is, for the most part, just leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more than capable of taking care of myself, and I think that most people are.
Mm-hmm. So, and that, when I, we, and Sean, we've talked about this before too, and when you said, our talk about when it comes to legalization of marijuana, when it comes about marriage and everything else, that we've talked about before, how we said government doesn't really need to be in our personal affairs. What was your, if you kind of want to interject your thoughts on this about what we've talked about before as far as government's role in this? What are you thinking on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as the legalization of marijuana goes, I would prefer it to be a federal issue, just so that the United States Army can finally partake in its wonderful benefits. Because as much as I would love for the great state of Missouri to finally get it done, it doesn't benefit me whatsoever. I'm gonna hold my breath and leave Sleepy Joe to figure out if that's what he's gonna wake up about. However, when it comes to like I've said before 100 times on this show, is I'm a firm believer in I believe that states should have the firmest grasp on, quote unquote, the power that they have over any kind of citizens. I don't believe that the federal government really needs to stick their nose in issues pertaining to certain regions of the United States. Like we've said before, what affects us here in Missouri is different than what people want in California, than what people want in Montana, what they even want just across the river in Illinois. We live in such a unique geographical location, as far as if you just look at the size of the landmass and the sheer amount of people that we have. What I always hate constantly is the comparison to other countries, like this country has free healthcare, or this country has free education, or this country does it this way. And I'm like, you don't get it. In most of these instances that they're talking about, you're talking about a very dense populated nation where, like, you could drive across the entire country in a matter of 8 hours. Okay. These are geographic regions where it makes sense, where if, on one side of the country, it might affect, certain things would affect people on the other side the exact same. We don't have that same thing here in the United States. And why? I don't think we should want to. Personally, I do believe that there's certain civil liberties that we should all have rights to. And I think that as we are now more than ever, it feels like we're starting to get into murky water when it comes to
and that's what and that's
civil liberties.
Right, and that's what I was going to say, and I was going to kind of lead Chad back in this too. If you, to me, if this goes down one way, this is going to be a slippery slope, because Illinois, and if you guys, we took off last week because we had a lot of stuff going on last week. But since we were on last week, so Illinois now, and I'm glad that I'm out of there. Illinois Now, J.B. Pritzker, I believe it was last Monday, had a press conference where he said, okay, every public school teacher in the state of Illinois either has to be vaccinated or they have to get tested every week. Okay? Every Illinois public school is going to be mask mandated. And to me, this is a slippery slope. I believe in protecting students. This is my number one thing, and it's always been my thing with education. I believe in the rights of students, but trying to make something happen, make it happen. We're going to force you. This is the same way, and I was when the whole, and I go back to Obamacare. Obamacare, you're going to purchase insurance, whether privately or the government's affordable care. People do not like to be told,
right,
you're going to do something. You know, now I can understand you're going to put a helmet on, you're going to be able to buckle your seatbelt. I agree with that. Excuse me. But when it comes to saying you're going to get a vaccine, now I know a lot of people. I have a student. And we actually talked about this on Friday. I have a student who is allergic to. She wants to get the vaccine, but she can't because and it's not because but it's some of the chemicals that are in the vaccine. If she takes it, it'll kill her. Mm-hmm. I mean, it'll be an anaphylactic shock, basically. Mm-hmm. So what do you? I mean, is this something?
I think the number one way to get me not to do something is to tell me I have to do it.
Right.
And I think a lot of people like that. It's just ingrained in Americans. We mm-hmm. have that sort of sense of freedom, and we don't want people telling us what to do. Mm-hmm. So for Dr. Fauci to say, well, it's not a political issue. Well, unfortunately, it has become that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's been pushed that way. I think the left is just as guilty as the right is mm-hmm. on that. Mm-hmm. Or rather, maybe the right is, being on the right, but, we're a little guilty of that as well. But it certainly is a political issue, whether Dr. Fauci admits it or not. I think that in the state of Missouri, what we might end up doing, and I think it's a very good solution to it, is to say that if anybody in the state of Missouri claims a religious exemption mm-hmm. from vaccines, mm-hmm. that religious exemption is granted on its face value. You don't have to prove your religiosity in the United States.
Right.
There's no password you have to say to prove it. So if I say I'm not doing something based on my religious conscience, that the First Amendment is important, right? So public health is important. But public health doesn't trump the Constitution.
Right.
Nothing trumps that, right? It's just fundamental to us mm-hmm. as Americans. Mm-hmm. And so,
if I can,
go ahead.
If I can interject, it will be interesting because what you said in regards to, like you said, you have to take it at face value. You don't necessarily have to prove your religion if, you decide to go with the religious exemption. It's interesting because, in the United States military, one of the big things that, the debate, at least for the Army, has always kind of been the beard policy. Because this is coming up with the COVID vaccine. There's already military members that are filling out religious exemption forms. The difference is between like people that are in the military and people that are not in the military is we do have to prove or at least come up with a pretty sound piece of evidence that proves that you might either follow or regularly practice this religion. They might have you sit in a board, like for example, like if I wanted to grow a beard, a way that I could do that is by claiming Nordic faith. And it's been a huge battle. Well, there are soldiers that are allowed to grow beard because they so choose to claim that faith. However, there's a huge process that they have to go through. And I know that it would be a lot more difficult to do that, to the entire United States on a civilian scale. But I wouldn't be surprised if, maybe not right away, but if this is one of those things that we just see around for a long period of time, and depending on what kind of rights get waived and moved to the side, it would be interesting to kind of see what they might start requiring people to do in order to claim that religious exemption.
See, and I think that your religious exemption should just be accepted by the statement you make that this is my religious opinion and conscience on the matter. And I don't think you should ever have to prove what that is. There's no way, in fact, there's no way of doing that.
No. And at some point, and this has been, we've circled around this point 1,000 times, I think, in the 27 episodes that we've had so far, Sean, though, is that the government, they believe that they have to solve every problem.
Oh, right. Well, Ronald Reagan said in our current crisis, government's not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. If you want something to get more messed up than it already is, by all means let the government take control of it.
One of his famous quotes is the words that should scare you to death. Hi, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help.
That's right.
And I saw that quote again this last week, and I miss Ronald Reagan. But if we look at within your region that you represent right now. And this is from Missouri's public health site today. 114 counties in the state of Missouri. Pike County is actually at 63rd. 2,283 cases reported so far, 31 deaths. Lincoln County is actually moved up the ladder quite a bit at 7,838 cases with 55 deaths. And Rawls County is 82, where they're way down the list, which kind of surprises me, but they're also very rural. With 1,409 cases and 14 deaths. So before we move on to other topics, I just want to kind of, I personally like what I'm hearing. Of course, I'm looking to see if anybody else has been commenting or not, but I haven't seen anything else. You think that we're even at the local level? I mean, do you see Pike County or like Pike County Health Department or Lincoln County Health Department swooping in and saying, forget what the state's saying. We're going to do what's best for us here. You guys do you see something like that occurring? Or
no, honestly, I don't. Obviously, I would direct it probably to the administrator of the Pike County Health Department or the Lincoln County Health Department or wherever. But keep in mind, these health departments are ultimately governed by an elected board of people from that county, right? And I think that the folks of Lincoln, Pike, Rawls, and Monroe County are, for the most part, pretty like-minded. In Jefferson City, we talk about our districts, right?
Right.
This 40th district is about a 75-25 district. By that I mean 75% voted for Donald Trump, 25% voted for Joe Biden. So, yeah, I would say that before the cities and the counties and school districts in rural Missouri do certain things, if your job is to represent the area that you're a part of, then you probably ought to keep in mind the will of the people. And I think it's pretty clear what the will of the people in rural America, not just here in Missouri, but you go across the river, you think of Illinois as being an incredibly liberal state, and it is not, right? Chicago is an incredibly liberal city, right? But the large geographical area of Illinois is just as conservative as anywhere else on earth.
Well, to them, I think Illinois thinks everything south of DuPage and Cook County that's Southern Illinois.
Right.
And just an interesting, I want to kind of go back to an interesting story that my wife had told me. My wife works for the state of Illinois, and she was telling me when she works with different contractors for people with special needs, and she was talking somewhere down and I remember when she was traveling, we went to this little town called Golconda, and you could look right across the river into Kentucky. And she was calling down there, and she says, well, this was in the heightened part of COVID last year. And she said, well, how's it affecting you down there? With all, shutdown. They said, and this surprised me. They said, our kids are still going to school.
Yeah.
Our kids are still going to school. We haven't shut down our businesses, even though the government's ordered us to shut down our businesses. And that, I don't know what county that is down there and down in Southern Illinois, but they were just like, we're going to do our own thing. And so, and that's the fear that I have is that, and of course, like you said earlier, us educators are like, we're week to week.
That's right, yeah.
And it's just, I hate the term, but we're getting used to it. The situation is fluid. I just get tired of hearing that, sir. But what can happen today can change tomorrow. And that really that is what, as an educator, annoys me the most.
Let me kind of make a couple of statements, if I can, real quickly. I wholeheartedly believe that no government entity, from the federal government down to any local school, has any right to ever tell someone they have to get a vaccine or a mask. No public entity, state, county, city, health department, just it's not a part of the government. With that being said, what if your private employer says, as terms of your employment, you have to wear a mask or you have to get a vaccine? That's an altogether different conversation, right? I believe the government can't tell you you've got to do it, but can the government tell your employer that they can't tell you that? I mean, if you think about it, what you wear, or what you wear has always been terms of one's employment, right? As a public school teacher, can you wear certain things on a T-shirt, or if you wanted to wear shorts to work, can you do that?
No, sure can.
So, and that applies in private business as well, right? Oftentimes in private business, people have to wear certain shoes, certain shirts. They have to have certain physical characteristics, right? Got to lift a certain amount of weight, whatever it might be. So what if your private employer says you got to wear a mask, or your private employer says you have to get a vaccine, and then you come to the government and say, this, for example, me, because this happens to me on a daily basis, my private employer is talking about doing this. Can you put a stop to that? And so, I kind of want to, right? I mean, there's a part of me that says, oh, no, you can't do that. But then there's a part of me that says, I can't scream every day that the government is overreaching. And then the moment that a private company does something I don't like, you bring down the heavy hand of government. Right. So I don't know that the government can tell a private employer that they can't tell their employees what they have to wear or what kind of vaccines they have to get. Once again, though, I do think that First Amendment religious exemption probably ought to be respected, even in that case.
Yeah, and and one of our listeners did come in and say he agreed with you. He said this is where politicians fail very much, and they stray away from listening to the populace, and he complimented you on that. You are very much in touch with the populace, and we do appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit more too about a couple of bills that you have co-sponsored, which we actually talked about one I wasn't aware of, but we were talking about. This is House Bill 85, and this is basically. I'll just read the first couple of lines. This is known as the Second Amendment Preservation Act. And it says, the General Assembly of the State of Missouri is firmly resolved to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against every aggression, whether foreign or domestic, and is duty-bound to oppose every infraction of those principles that constitute the basis of the Union of the States. Because of the faithful observance of these principles that can secure the Union's existence. And so, basically, this is a bill that you co-sponsored with. It says Representative Taylor. I don't remember which.
Jared Taylor was the primary sponsor on that bill. It had a number of co-sponsors. Jared's from the kind of south of Branson area.
Okay. And
so the Second Amendment Preservation Act, in essence, says it's pushing back against the federal government. And it says that, of course, the federal government has a number of law enforcement agencies of their own. The FBI, obviously, is the one that first comes to mind, U.S. Marshal Service, whatever it might be, right? Exactly right. But what it does say, in essence, is that if a Missouri police officer, because if you're a police officer in the state of Missouri, whether you're the Highway Patrol, County Sheriff's Office, a local police department, you get your license from the state, right? That license doesn't come from the federal government. You get your license from the state. And it says that if you are actively enforcing a lot of these federal government laws, when it comes to the Second Amendment, you run the risk of losing your Missouri police officer's license. He said, whoa, are you saying if someone robs a convenience store with a gun, they could lose their license for making that arrest? No, that's not what I'm saying. By the way, robbing a convenience store is a state law, right? Federal laws are these things that have to do primarily with things like magazine capacity and waiting periods, these things that I guess they make people feel good, but what good is it really doing, right? So I tell you who those laws affect. They affect you. Right. They affect the Andy Van Bebbers of the world. Criminals aren't really abiding by those in the first place, right? If you're a criminal by your very nature, you don't really care what the magazine capacity is. And you say, oh, I can't do that because the federal government says I can only have 10 rounds in this handgun, right? So anything that involves assault or robbery, anything of that nature, is is a state law. That's the state law, and law enforcement in Missouri will do those things. But if the federal government comes in and says, well, you can't have this additional device on your rifle, if they pass a law that says that, and there are a number of those out there, that's not the job of the Missouri Highway Patrol, the county sheriff, or the local police department. That's the job of the federal government. And if you want to go and enforce these, honest to God, frivolous laws that the federal government passes, then you run the risk of not being a law enforcement officer in the state of Missouri.
And I was also looking at some of the language further down in this bill. Well, actually, at this law now, we don't have to call it a bill anymore. But this in the subsection, let me see. It says the following federal acts, laws, executive orders, administrative orders, such and such, shall be considered infringements on the people's rights to keep and bear arms as guaranteed by the Amendment 2 of the Constitution. And some of these things that you're saying is any tax, levy, fee, or stamp imposed on firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition not common to all of goods. Any registering, which is what the government's talking about doing, has been talking about doing, registering or tracking firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition that might reasonably be expected to create a chilling effect on the purchase of ownership of these by law-abiding citizens, like you said, and any registration.
Mr. Biden wants to know what guns Andy Van Bever owns.
Right.
He doesn't care that he just gave billions of dollars worth of ammunition to the Taliban.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
He's more concerned about you than he is the Taliban.
Right.
Think about that for a second.
Right. And to me, I mean, the gun, the whole, and Sean, we've had this discussion too. You jump in any time, but when we talk, and again, so here we are coming back to the same point that we just mentioned on the whole COVID thing. When the federal government is going to say, okay, this is what, and this was Sean's argument too about, okay, this will work maybe this will work in California, maybe this will work in New York. But in Missouri, when we are largely, we're largely rural, and we are, outside of Kansas City, Jeff City, Columbia, St. Louis, Warrenton, or.
But by the way, that's what I love about. I live kind of half the year here and half the year in Jeff City.
Right.
But Jeff City's just as red as it is here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really great thing.
And people, but to me again, so are you concerned about? I mean, when this, and I'm sure that sometime this will go before federal court somewhere. How do you think that this will stand in the federal court?
Well, the Attorney General believes it will pass. It's already passed through Missouri court.
Right.
It's interesting, right? Because my friends on the left screamed, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't disregard federal laws." The same group of people who for 30 years have been saying sanctuary cities are fine.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Where we're not going to pay attention to these immigration laws. You're welcome to come here illegally and stay in San Francisco, right? Or my friends in St. Louis were like, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that." But they would be the last people on earth to say, "Oh, you got to pay attention to an immigration law." There's a lot of hypocrisy there.
Well, and that's when I like the some of the other things in this. See here, where was it? There was another thing on here that. Okay, so here's the other thing that I was, it says that the Constitution of Missouri, while acting under the color of any state or federal law, shall be liable to the injured party in action law or equity of other proceeding or redress. In such actions, the court may award the prevailing party other than the state of Missouri any political subdivision of the state reasonable attorney fees.
There's got to be some teeth to it.
Right. Yeah, and so I know that this is where, as a student of the law, government is my favorite subject to teach, and I know what government theory says. Government theory says, okay, with the supremacy clause in the Constitution, we are the supreme law of the land.
Right.
But do you think? So is this? Obviously, this is Missouri drawing that line in the sand, though. When you say
it will play out in court.
Yeah. So let's see what we.
It'll play out in court. I'd like to talk about a bill that I also sponsored this year, that said if you are the head of household in the state, SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what you used to call food stamps, right?
Right.
It said if you're the head of household in the state of Missouri, and you're not above a certain age. Something 62, something like that, right? Or you're not have certain physical impairments, right? That you, the head of household, are required to work 20 hours a week, or you're required to attend full-time education, or you're required to do 20 hours of community service a week in order for you, the head of household, to qualify for those SNAP benefits. It wouldn't apply to any dependents you have. So the children would still get all the same benefits they always got. And the left said, "Oh, Chad Perkins hates, poor people. Chad Perkins hates children." No, it's ridiculous to think that, right? If you right now, anywhere in this country, don't have a job, it's because you don't want a job. Because quite literally, everybody is hiring. Everyone, and I have faith in people enough to say that if there's a chance that you're going to go hungry, you got to get a job, you're going to get a job.
Right.
People will do what it takes to survive, and they're literally everyone is hiring.
And I applauded.
We're in Louisiana right now. Take a drive down Georgia Street.
You can't. That's
everybody is
and
hiring.
I applauded the governor's action. I think it was in June when he said, "We're not going to do the unemployment insurance for COVID." Because that was such a. Right now you can't go anywhere in this city. I'll take that back. You can go to Dos Primos. That's the only place you can eat at in Dairy Queen right now. That's the only place you can eat at. You can't go to Subway. You can't go to Hardee's. You can't
go in. You mean?
No, you can't get served because they're closed.
Oh.
They can't get people to work.
Right.
They don't have enough. For all the month of August and July, Subway was closed on Sundays because they didn't have the weekend staff. And they this last Sunday was the first Sunday that they had been open since June because they couldn't find the weekend staff.
Right.
If
you don't have a job, you don't want one.
Right. Sean, you're going to say something?
Well, so that was just what is the word coming from, Jeff City, or what are the discussions being had? Because, it seems like we're getting into a place. To be completely honest, I've never seen in my life where businesses like fast food restaurants, industrial jobs and warehouse jobs and things like that are offering bonuses to new employees. I've personally never seen up until recently a McDonald's here in Jeff City is offering a $300 sign-on bonus after 4 weeks of working.
Yeah.
So even with these incentives, what happens if these positions aren't filled? What is Missouri, or what are steps thinking that they might be able to do to incentivize people more to get back to working? Because we've never seen anything like this. Like that we still have the same amount of people, but places just can't seem to keep employees. And as someone that was running a restaurant for quite a while during the COVID pandemic, keeping staff was damn near impossible. And where I worked, the owners paid extremely competitive. Full-time was available consistently, yet we had people quitting every single time, the stimulus check came out, so what are some things that the state legislators are kind of trying to do to try to get people back to work?
Bills like this one, I think, are a good one to get us started. It made it out of committee. It didn't really make it to the floor. We didn't. The clock kind of ran out on it in this session. I intend on bringing it back up again. I think it's a good bill. The bill doesn't hate anybody, right? It's just simply saying, the government is there to give you a hand up. It's not to give you the handout constantly. And so, if you want to be a part of it, then you got to put a little skin in the game. And I think that bills like that are good bills. You need to see more of that kind of thing because the government does make it sort of too easy to do that. There's a group of people out there that like to peddle poverty, right? Instead of promoting prosperity. There's a group of people out there that would be more than happy just to see people live on that government dime forever. If you were on Medicaid, which a lot of times is geared toward lower income folks.
Right.
If you're a Medicaid recipient, you were 6 times more likely to have voted for Joe Biden than you were to have voted for Donald Trump. So I think that it's a political issue. If you want more government subsidies and you want more government handouts, there's a party you vote for. That's just the way it is.
I just
I don't want to be too political.
No,
but that's a fact.
The fact that so when you talk about the last stimulus, the last government package, that one, we just increased our was it back this summer? So $1 trillion right to the top.
Right.
We're now approaching, what are we, approaching 28 trillion, I believe now is what we're, and I remember at the beginning of my teaching career, when the national debt topped $10 trillion back at the turn of this century, we thought that was it. And in 20 years, we've added $18 trillion. And like you said, a lot of it is going to these these programs. And people want to say, oh, well, you're anti. And we've had the discussion about minimum wage, and I want to ask you about that here in a second too. But I mean, does it come across as anti-poverty, or is it just common sense in saying you've got you need to work?
Right.
You need to work.
It's not anti-poverty. In
Right.
fact, nothing would make me happier than to see everybody be successful.
Right.
The last thing you need is the government. Really, I think Ronald Reagan said, well, we quote him a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
He said on an episode of Johnny Carson back in the 70s that if the government were to shut down for a few weeks, most of us would probably never even notice.
Right. And he said it should be that way too. It should be too much. Yeah, I remember that. I've seen that clip. It's like I think he said. I actually think he said a couple months.
Right.
He said the government should operate at a level where we wouldn't know if it shut down today. We wouldn't know for a couple of months. And so, and what we're seeing happen, and I keep on being almost half of my life living in Illinois, how things operate over there is just, it's like, and again, people call me racist for saying this too, but I think the Democrats target lower income, and if that happens to be African American, say, we're going to help you out. It's almost like they're keeping them in poverty to say, vote for us and we'll get you this aid. And I mean, I know that's not the popular thing to say, but to me, that's what promotes, you're promoting poverty.
You are seeing more and more. I mean, these are facts. You're seeing more and more African Americans and Hispanics voting Republican all the time and becoming Republican all the time. I mean, for example, Larry Elder in California, nothing scares the Democrat Party more than a successful African American who may become governor of California.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are the governor of California and you're a Republican,
You've done a lot. With
the ability to win California, you're a major player for who may be the next president.
Right.
Right? Because if you can win California, it's game over.
Right. And the other thing, so
that's just over a week away. So
I'm interested. That's going to be interesting.
Their way of doing recalls are kind of odd, right?
Yeah.
Because you can become governor without even anything close to a plurality of the vote.
People yank you out and then
Right.
Yeah.
But it's their law. But the fact is, the guy, if he could win, is automatically a front runner for president.
He's got a very good chance of winning.
Right.
So the last thing, I think we got a little bit of time. We can touch on this real bit. Where do you see the status of minimum wage heading to in Missouri right now? I mean, right now we are what are we on? What's the governor? I know he laid out a framework of what he wants to see happen in the next few years. What are you seeing realistically happen as far
I've never been a big proponent of minimum wage laws, right? I think that I think that I got a laissez-faire idea of that, right? I think people get paid kind of what they're worth, right? And but let's go back to jobs. There's a prison in Bowling Green right now hiring 150 people. They start out at over $17 an hour. It comes with health insurance, retirement, vacation, sick time, comp time. I mean, these are good jobs, right? And it would hire 150 people right now if they could get just somebody to come in. So this idea of minimum wage being an issue, I mean, if you as an adult want to go get something, you can go get it right now that pays far more than minimum wage.
Right.
So I think that any minimum wage laws ought to have exceptions for certain lines of work and age, right? So if you're 16 and you're living at home, I don't think you should expect to get paid what a grown adult does, or on certain jobs, right? But at the same time, if you work in the restaurant industry, right, and let's say you're a server, then these minimum wage laws need to keep in mind that the fact that a good server is making far more money in tips than they ever could making
Minimum
a certain wage, right?
right.
If you're a good sir, same thing applies for a sales job, right? If you're a salesman and you're hiring me for a sales job and you say I can give you X amount of base and a smaller commission, or I can give you a higher commission for your sales and a smaller base. Well, any good salesman's going to say, give me the higher higher commission.
Right. So do you think? And we had, I forgot who it was we had on when we talked about the minimum wage issue. I think it was when Matt Edelman was on talking with us about this. And here's the argument. So, and I want to get your take on this. The argument being that if we say, okay, minimum wage, up until the last time that minimum wage meant the cost of living was 1968.
Right.
Okay. And so now we have separated it, and so some of these people who are saying, okay, my argument has always been it's about the level of application that you want to do. Mm-hmm. You are free to do whatever you want to. But if someone, what do you say? What do you say to someone who says, okay, I'm stuck in a place where I have 2 kids, I got to work 2 jobs, I don't have time to get an education.
Right.
I mean, how do you address that? I mean, because this is something that we're hearing a lot of people saying. I'm stuck.
Right.
And my wife is working 2 jobs. I'm working a job, and then we've got 2 kids. We have our mortgage payment, car payment. I would like to, nobody. I mean, it's hard for me to find somebody who doesn't say, "Well, I want to improve myself."
Right.
But how do you respond to somebody who says, "I can't get out of this. I'm stuck in this rut"? How do you approach it? And they say, "We need a little bit more help to add to the minimum wage." How would you approach that?
Let me also point out that Missouri is kind of complex. It's a big place. So let's say you're living in a place like St. Charles, where house prices are $400,000 or $500,000, and the cost of living is much higher than it is here in Louisiana.
Right.
If you're living in Louisiana, Missouri, and you're making $35,000 a year, that's not a bad job.
No.
Now, if you're living in St. Louis County, it might be a little tough. But so depending on where you live makes a huge difference on what constitutes livable wages, right? So, if you want to really look into what makes sense, it almost has to come down to county by county to some extent, right? But I get people oftentimes feel that. I mean, I think there's points and times in all of our lives where we say, "Man, I'm stuck in this situation," whether it's a relationship, whether it is your job, whatever it might be. People feel stuck all the time. You can do it. You got to make your mind up, especially right now. We've been talking about all the jobs that are available. Now, this might be a better conversation, at a point in time where jobs aren't quite as plentiful.
Right.
But there are so many jobs out there, regardless of your education, and education is incredibly important, right? But there are some jobs out there that pay really great money with no specialized education right now.
And I think the argument that I've heard a lot of too is people say, okay, well, I don't want to go into, and again, it's a two-edged sword. I think when we have this discussion, because some people say, I don't want to go into a job that I'm going to take a step backwards in, and I kind of want to say, okay, then how bad do you want to work? And so, to me, and Sean, we've talked about this with various people too, that say, okay, I don't want. We had that one super liberal friend that we're not going to mention, but we have that he would say this would be his argument. Why would I want to move forward? Why would I want to, if I'm making, again, Illinois, they're making $600 a week, unemployment. Why would I want to go into a job that I hate, that I don't want to do,
right?
And it's a step backwards.
The government makes it too easy.
Exactly.
It makes it too easy not to want to work.
Yeah. And so, so going forward, to get back to my original, does the governor what kind of time, does he have a time? I mean, I know that Illinois is saying by 2025 they want to be up to $15 an hour.
Yeah. I don't think this is a topic of conversation that's nearly, is not going around much in Jeff City.
Okay.
This topic is not being discussed at any length right now.
So do you hear this kind of talk within like the St. Louis Contingency and all those guys? I mean, are they talking about this, or is this something that just it's not going to be an issue?
It's certainly not an issue at the moment. Right. We have supermajorities in the House. We have supermajorities in the Senate. We have a Republican governor. It's not going around much as a conversation.
Okay. So the last thing that I want to get to then tonight is the other thing that you want to talk, and we don't, this other one that you said there was a lot of co-sponsors on this one too, the force of incident. This is House Bill 998 about it's saying that where was it at? Peace officer use of force incident should be making is this making police officers more accountable to what they're doing? Is this was this in reaction to?
The thing there is. There's a desire out there for some law enforcement reform, right? Criminal justice reform is kind of a topic right now. It's kind of a hot button topic, right? Mm-hmm. I'll say, if I can speak to something he was saying earlier, you were talking about making marijuana potentially legal in the state of Missouri, right? So in Missouri, you have, and I'll get to this in a second. You have initiative petition, right? You get enough signatures on a piece of paper, you can put whatever you want to on the ballot in the state of Missouri. So at some point in time, recreational marijuana will get there. I think that probably its primary opponent at the moment is medical marijuana, because they just spent millions making medical marijuana legal in the state of Missouri. So if you all of a sudden you make it recreational, they lose out on their huge investment, right?
Right.
But at some point in time, you've got to address that in Jefferson City, because I think in my mind it would be better for us to at least explore these options before it makes it to the ballot, because if it makes it on the ballot, we may not like at all what we see on that ballot. Right? If it gets on the ballot, my gut says it passes.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. Where do you see that going?
My gut says if it makes it on the ballot, it passes, which is another reason why we need to, in Jefferson City, have these conversations about recreational marijuana, regardless of your feelings on it. Right? I don't think you find a lot of objection among law enforcement. You don't find a lot of objection among conservatives or liberals. So as long as the law is being crafted, I would like to at least have a hand in how it's crafted. I think that it needs to be regulated the same way we do alcohol, right? You can't drive with it.
Right.
You can't, operate certain equipment with it, right? But then it goes back to the employer. Well, my employer says I can't do it. Well, that's between you and your employer,
right.
And the government's not going to get involved in that, right? But I think we need to have that conversation, and if there's a well-crafted law, I wouldn't be opposed to voting for it.
So, do you see this as would you see this as a new opportunity for the state to create a new source?
There are a number of revenue streams out there that I think the state of Missouri needs to talk about. One of them is recreational marijuana. There are others. Online sports gambling. Mm-hmm. It's going on. It is going on everywhere all the time. It's going through states that it is legal. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Nevada, Missouri. It's going on right here in Missouri. It's going on probably right now somewhere in Louisiana, Missouri. Someone's doing online sports gambling. Right. And there's money being made that the state of Missouri is missing out on by not making it legal. Mm-hmm. And so people say, well, it targets the poor. Well, I've been to a lot of casinos. Mm-hmm. Casino goers are primarily senior citizens,
right?
And for most folks, it's disposable income, right? And once again, I don't need the government protecting me from me,
right?
So, as long as it's going on, we need to go ahead and make it legal. That's another revenue stream we're missing out on.
So do you? And
I'm sorry, we can talk about
no. You actually, we're getting close anyway, but the other thing that I want to get to and I'm glad you brought this up, because I'm glad you brought that up, because Sean did mention it earlier. So let's talk about this just real quick. We've got a few minutes left. My biggest problem, and this came this is my 25th year in education. When Missouri first started its first casinos, I remember up at LaGrange, they had their the boats in a moat thing and all this stuff, and they talk about, to me as an educator, I think this may step on somebody's toe somewhere, but I think it's the greatest disservice to us when you say, well, that money's going towards education.
Right. Well, you and I both know exactly what happens, right? Missouri has a foundation formula.
Right. Yeah, I was getting ready to say that.
Lotteries and casinos fund that foundation formula. But every time you put something new into the foundation formula, they rip out an equivalent amount and send it somewhere else.
Right.
So you're not getting any farther ahead.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that some safeguards that would be enacted that says, any new money coming into it, you can't take anything else away.
Right.
That's probably in education's best interest.
And that's what we're seeing with it. I always, whenever we talk about these new income sources or these new taxes, and say, well, it's going to go, it's going to go towards it. And I get leery of that, because I always say, okay, when was the last time that the foundation formula was fully funded?
Right.
You
That's
know,
exactly right.
it's been a long time since I remember saying, hey, you know, we're close to 90 some odd percent of being fully funded, and I'm just like, and that's always MSTA's PowerPoint is when they tell us when we go, okay, how are we going to be coming with the foundation
Now,
formula?
I will say this. The fact is that most, if I can talk about MSTA for just a second,
Yeah.
most teachers, I'm not sure that MSTA, just my opinion, represents teachers as well as it does MSTA.
Right.
Right? So teachers are, for the overwhelmingly great people. A lot of the folks in MSTA aren't necessarily educators. A lot of them are activists.
Right.
Right? And so I don't know that MSTA is actually looking out, just like, hey, teachers aren't a part of a union, but oftentimes
We have we do have NEA, but it's, you know, the same
NEA
same
is even
thing.
beyond
Right,
MSTA.
right.
But unions aren't always looking out for their members as much as they are the top echelons.
Right,
Right.
right.
And the same applies in education.
Right. Sean, did you have anything else tonight?
I just had a real quick question, Chad. Just if you were aware of, and you might not be, if you were aware of any potential bills or anything that might be making their way to a committee or the floor soon, with regards to Missouri's film tax credit laws or regulations, if anything like that has kind of been talked about or discussed.
We have a special session. We have a veto session next week. I do think that the only potential new things that we discuss next week will have to do primarily with vaccines and masks. We can file new bills in December. So there aren't any bills right there at the moment. New bills can start getting filed about December 1st. The session will start somewhere around January 6th. But I think you're bringing up a great thing, right? Because you're seeing a huge industry in New Orleans, in Georgia, places outside of California that are making great money.
Because
in the film industry, and I think that would be good to bring to Missouri. So I mean, if you know somebody who is well versed on the topic and knows this well, I'd like to talk to him, and we'd be glad to co-sponsor something that makes good sense.
Yeah, I'd love to sit down and chat with you about it, just because Missouri is one of the unfortunately worst states when it comes to tax credit revenue for films. I believe
a great example of that is that Jason Bateman show Ozark, which should be being filmed at the Lake of the Ozarks. Instead, it's being filmed actually in Georgia and set in Missouri, right?
Yeah. I think like in like perspective, I think there was a conversation, and I was reading, I think the last time any kind of tax credit money had been set aside for the state of Missouri was like $175,000. I think that was in 2016 or 2018. But states like Georgia, again, somewhere in the ballpark, the last I had read in 2018, they had aside what I do believe was $35 million in tax revenue for film productions, which generated $9.8 billion of income for the state. So I mean,
so it's
one of those
it's
things
a pretty good
that,
investment.
Big time. And it just provides so many jobs for not only actors here in the state of Missouri,
that guy
but
right
also
there,
the local. Yeah, right. The local populace, as far as like hotels and entertainment, always thrive, and so
we should tell Chad that not only is Sean a veteran and a Army recruiter, National Guard recruiter, he's also a professional wrestler. He's also an aspiring actor.
I saw the Terry Taylor T-shirt you got on.
Oh, the old
Rick
the old Rick Flair.
Flair. The Nature Boy.
Yeah.
16-time world heavyweight champion.
Yep.
It was just recently at the Chase Plaza for NWA. Yeah.
And I actually
it's finally back for the first time in.
I like if we can
decades.
change gears completely. I like what he had to say there. I watched a YouTube video of him actually speaking in the ring where he's talking about how we're changing topics altogether.
That's okay.
But
That's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's what we do. That's what we do.
Loves Ric Flair. Anyway, he's talking about how competition is good for the industry. Things like the NWA or TNA and all these other things that are going on. if you remember, you talked about, has the country ever been more divided than it is right now? Well, let me take you back to 1995 on a Monday night where I'm switching at 17. I'm switching back and forth,
Back
right?
and forth between
But,
TNT and TNN,
yeah, exactly right. Now that we were divided at that time, right? But good.
Who are you for, WCW or WWE?
And that competition is good for the industry. It makes them all better. So.
Yeah. Well, we have really appreciated you joining us tonight, Chad, and I know Travis hated not being. He wanted to really be a part of the conversation tonight, but I said, if you don't want your wife to kill you, you better celebrate that birthday.
Oh yeah.
So.
All right, a pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, and V, do you have anything before I go on my show?
No, we're glad to have Chad with us, and like I said, you're always welcome to come back and join us. We've had a lot of different, for 27 episodes. We've had quite a few special guests, so I'm quite pleased.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but we thank you.
Yeah, and no, absolutely. And Chad, we'll definitely we'll chat to have you back again in the future. And beforehand, we'll definitely set out and get a lot of questions and good stuff from our listeners and viewers, and definitely kind of have a panel for you. So yeah, I do appreciate you taking your time. I know it's never easy shuffling out and getting out of your way, and then unfortunately have to sit across from Andy for an hour is something I had to do for 4 years in a row every day of my life. So.
Thanks, buddy.
But no. I do definitely appreciate it. And again, to all of our listeners, thank you all so much. This was a great live stream. Lots of people on listening. Again, thank you all so much for being patient with us. There was a lot going on last week that we can touch on next week, but it was just kind of a whirlwind of events. But we're here. It's kind of been a crazy couple of weeks, but we'll definitely get back into it next week. So again, thank you all so much for listening to us. If you want to check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you guys get your podcasts from, please check us out also on YouTube and Facebook under the Voice of Reason Podcast 2021. This was a great episode, Chad. Again, thank you so very much. Andy, again, thank you, and we will see you guys next week.